First contact's awkward question. Dr. Maya Chen stood before the mirror in her office at the International Xenobiological Research Center, adjusting her lab coat for the 10th time. The historical significance of today wasn't lost on her. Humanity's first face-to-face meeting with the Dorjans, a species that had made contact 6 months ago through radio signals. As Earth's leading expert in comparative xenobiology, she had been chosen to lead the scientific exchange. The Dorjans were known for their direct approach to communication and their fascinating biology. They evolved from burrowing creatures on a high-gravity world, developing into sentient beings that still retained some of their ancestral characteristics. Their bodies were serpentine but with multiple specialized limbs, and they moved with a grace that defied their unusual appearance. "Dr. Chen," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "They're here." Maya took a deep breath and headed for the conference room. The delegation had arrived through their matter transfer technology, a system that still made human scientists scratch their heads in wonder. As she approached the room, she could hear excited murmuring from the gathered officials and scientists. The doors slid open, revealing 3 Dorjans. Their iridescent scales shifted colors in the fluorescent lighting, creating patterns that seemed to ripple across their elongated bodies. Each stood about 7 feet tall when fully upright, their upper bodies supported by powerful muscle structures that allowed them to switch between bipedal and serpentine movement. The lead Dorjan, identified by the elaborate markings on their scales, moved forward. "Greetings, Dr. Chen. I am Chief Researcher Quirks." Their universal translator rendered their complex harmonics into perfectly accented English. "We are most eager to begin our biological exchange program." Maya smiled warmly. "Welcome to Earth, Chief Researcher Quirks. We're honored to host your delegation." The meeting proceeded smoothly at first. The Dorjans were fascinated by human technology, particularly our adaptation of their translation matrices. They asked intelligent questions about Earth's gravity, atmospheric composition, and biological diversity. Everything was going perfectly until Quirks tilted their head in that peculiar way their species had of showing intense curiosity. "Dr. Chen, we have reviewed the preliminary biological data you sent us, but there seems to be an anomaly we cannot explain." Quirks's translator hummed with genuine scientific interest. "Why do human males have a miniature version of our species' ancestral form between their legs?" The room fell silent. Maya blinked, her professional composure cracking slightly as she processed the question. The Dorjans, with their serpentine bodies, had apparently noticed certain anatomical similarities to their own form in human male anatomy, similarities that had led to this monumentally awkward moment. Well, Maya cleared her throat, her years of scientific training kicking in. "That's actually a fascinating question from an evolutionary standpoint. You see, Earth's evolutionary history has produced numerous examples of convergent development." She launched into a detailed explanation of human reproduction and evolution, carefully maintaining scientific terminology, while diplomatic staff tried to hide their expressions behind their tablets. The Dorjans listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting with questions that made the human officials increasingly uncomfortable. Quirks said finally, their scales shifting to a deep blue that Maya would later learn indicated deep thought. "So it is not, as we initially hypothesized, a vestigial miniature burrowing appendage used for excavating nesting sites." A muffled snort came from somewhere in the back of the room. Maya maintained her composure through sheer force of will. "No, though I can understand how you might have drawn that conclusion based on your own evolutionary history." The meeting continued, but word of the Dorjans' innocent question spread through the facility like wildfire. By day's end, Maya had received 17 emails with variations of "mini Shai-Hulud" in the subject line, each containing increasingly elaborate jokes about the incident. As she prepared her initial report that evening, Maya couldn't help but smile. First contact situations always came with their share of cultural misunderstandings, but this one would certainly go down in the history books, probably in a chapter that would make future xenobiologists blush. Quirks had remained behind after the delegation left, eager to continue their scientific discussion. Dr. Chen, I sensed that our question caused some discomfort among your colleagues. Have we committed a cultural error? Maya considered her response carefully. In human culture, we tend to be reserved about discussing certain aspects of our anatomy. But please don't worry. Your question was perfectly valid from a scientific perspective. In fact, it might help us understand more about convergent evolution across different star systems. Quirks's scales shifted to a pleasant green hue. This is most fascinating. Among our people, all aspects of biology are discussed freely. We have much to learn from each other, it seems. They paused, their head tilting again. Though I must admit, I am still puzzled by your species' tendency to clothe this particular appendage so thoroughly. If it is not used for burrowing, surely it does not require such protective covering. Maya decided then and there that she deserved a raise. The biological puzzle. 2 weeks after the infamous first meeting, Maya found herself in her newly expanded laboratory, surrounded by holographic displays of comparative anatomy. Quirks moved through the space with fluid grace, their scales shimmering with excitement as they examined the data. Your species' method of bipedal locomotion is remarkably inefficient, Quirks observed, manipulating a 3D model of human musculature. Yet you've managed to become the dominant species on your planet. Fascinating. Maya looked up from her notes. Sometimes inefficiency can lead to unexpected advantages. Our upright posture freed our hands for tool use, and our endurance running capabilities helped us become successful hunters, despite not being the strongest or fastest. Ah yes, the persistence hunting technique you mentioned. Quirks's scales rippled with interest. Though I must ask, given your species' remarkable endurance, why do so many humans become breathless during mating rituals? Our surveillance of human entertainment media suggests this is a common occurrence. Maya nearly choked on her coffee. Quirks, where exactly are you getting your data about human mating rituals? Your planet's global information network has been most illuminating. Though we are having difficulty distinguishing between documentary evidence and something called romantic comedies, Quirks projected a series of movie scenes they had analyzed. These seem highly inconsistent with the biological data. There's a very good reason for that, Maya said, hurriedly shutting off the projection. We need to have a serious discussion about reliable sources of scientific information. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. James Morrison, Maya's colleague and the facility's lead geneticist, bursting into the lab. Maya, you need to see this. The genetic analysis of the Dorjan samples came back, and, oh, he stopped short at the sight of Quirks. I didn't realize you were in conference. Please proceed, Quirks encouraged, their translator harmonizing with curiosity. We Dorjans believe in complete transparency in scientific matters. James glanced at Maya, who nodded. Well, we've found something remarkable. The Dorjan genetic structure shows signs of what appears to be intentional engineering, dating back roughly 50,000 years. Quirks's scales shifted to a deep purple Maya had never seen before. Ah, you've discovered the awakening markers. Yes, our ancestors modified themselves to accelerate their evolution. Is this not common practice among developing species? Maya and James exchanged looks. Not exactly, Maya said carefully. Human evolution has been entirely natural, aside from some very recent and limited genetic therapies for medical conditions. How peculiar, Quirks mused. Then your appendages are all original equipment, as you might say, even the miniature burrower. James, who hadn't been present for the first meeting, blinked in confusion. The what now? We're still working on terminology, Maya said quickly. Quirks, maybe we should focus on comparing our species' circulatory systems for now. But Quirks was already pulling up new holographic displays. Actually, I've been meaning to discuss something that's been puzzling my research team. We've noticed that humans seem to experience significant physiological changes when viewing certain stimuli. Blood flow increases to specific regions, particularly the facial areas, and other appendages. Is this some form of threat response? James was struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. I should probably go catalog those genetic markers in detail somewhere else. He made a hasty retreat, leaving Maya to handle the increasingly specific questions about human physiological responses. Cracks, Maya said patiently. Remember our discussion about cultural sensitivity? Of course. That's why I've been conducting my research discreetly, using only publicly available data sources. Cracks's scales rippled proudly. I've even started categorizing human mating behaviors based on your entertainment media. Did you know humans have approximately 317 different terms for the act-off? Stop. Maya held up her hands. We need to have a very long talk about the difference between entertainment and reality, and maybe set some boundaries on research methodologies. Cracks tilted their head. But how can we achieve true understanding between our species if we don't study all aspects of human behavior? For instance, we've noticed that humans often use references to our physical form in their casual speech. Just yesterday, I heard a human male tell this friend that something scared the snake right out of his pants. We weren't aware humans kept our kind as pets. Maya closed her eyes and counted to 10. When she opened them, Cracks was projecting more movie scenes, complete with analytical annotations. These instances of human courtship seem particularly inefficient. Why do they not simply state their reproductive intentions clearly? And why do they insist on removing their clothing so slowly? Is there a ritual significance to this timing? Right, Maya said, reaching for her phone. I'm calling an emergency meeting of the Cultural Exchange Committee. And Cracks, we're going to need to have a serious discussion about your research viewing habits. Excellent. Cracks's scales brightened. I have prepared a presentation on human reproductive behaviors as depicted in various media formats. I'm particularly interested in discussing the significance of something called Netflix and chill. The data suggests it rarely involves actual temperature regulation. Maya made a mental note to request hazard pay for this assignment. And maybe a vacation. A long one. Cultural exchange gone wrong. The Interstellar Scientific Conference on Comparative Xenobiology was being held on Europa Station, humanity's first major off-world research facility. Maya stood in the preparation room, reviewing Cracks's presentation slides with growing horror. Cracks, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. We cannot show this to the assembled delegates of 17 different species. Why not? Cracks's scales shimmered with genuine confusion. The research is thorough, and we've cited all our sources, including something called TikTok, which seems to be a primary repository of human cultural documentation. Maya pinched the bridge of her nose. That's part of the problem. We need to discuss your data sources again, and maybe why creating a presentation titled Human Reproductive Appendages, a comprehensive analysis of form, function, and cultural significance isn't appropriate for an interspecies conference. But the Zelaxians specifically requested information about human biological functions. Cracks protested. Their species reproduces through binary fission, and they find mammalian anatomy fascinating, particularly the parts that resemble various garden implements. Before Maya could respond, the door slid open to admit Ambassador Chen, her mother. Maya, darling, I just saw the presentation schedule. Please tell me you've reviewed the Dorjan research materials. I'm trying to, Maya said weakly, as Cracks proudly displayed their next slide. A detailed comparison between human male anatomy and various Earth creatures, complete with size charts and evolutionary theories. We've made some fascinating discoveries, Cracks announced. Did you know that human males experience significant anxiety about the size of their burrowing appendages? We believe this may be related to ancient competition for nesting sites, though this doesn't explain the curious human practice of sending unsolicited photographic documentation off. Cracks, Maya interrupted desperately. Remember what we discussed about private versus public information. Of course, Cracks's scales shifted to a scholarly blue. That's why I focused on publicly available data. For instance, these advertisements for enhancement products suggest the humans have significant concerns about the performance of their. Ambassador Chen held up a hand. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to discuss presentation guidelines. But it was too late. The conference hall was already filling with delegates from across known space. The Zalaxians, floating crystalline beings, had positioned themselves in the front row, their translation matrices humming with anticipation. The Vex, a species of hyper-intelligent arachnids, had already begun taking notes. Quirks slithered to the podium, their scales gleaming with academic pride. Distinguished colleagues, today we present our groundbreaking research on human biological characteristics, with a special focus on what we initially mistook for vestigial burrowing equipment. Maya contemplated whether the station's airlocks were manually operated. The Dorsian delegation, seated in the front row, watched with evident pride as Quirks began their presentation. As you can see from this chart, Quirks continued, displaying a graph that made several human delegates choke on their coffee. There is a curious correlation between human male confidence and their perception of their appendage size. We've documented numerous compensation behaviors, including the acquisition of large ground vehicles and aggressive displays of wealth. The Zalaxians' crystals chimed with interest. The Vex's multiple eyes widened. In the back of the hall, someone was quietly filming the presentation on their phone. Of particular note, Quirks said, advancing to the next slide, is the human cultural obsession with these appendages. They appear in artwork, literature, and something called emoji combinations, which we're still working to decode. We've documented over 2,000 slang terms, ranging from the descriptive to the bizarrely metaphorical. Maya watched in horror as Quirks displayed a comprehensive list of euphemisms, complete with etymological analysis. Several universal translators began smoking as they attempted to process the colloquialisms. The most puzzling aspect, Quirks continued, seemingly oblivious to the chaos they were causing, is the human practice of naming these appendages. Our research suggests this is not standardized, with designations ranging from historical figures to fictional characters. We're particularly intrigued by the prevalence of weather-related terminology. A Vex researcher raised one of their 8 legs. Query: is this why humans often reference these appendages when expressing surprise or dismay? We have noted frequent exclamations involving these organs in various emotional contexts. An excellent observation. Quirks's scales brightened. We have an entire section on involuntary verbal references to these appendages during moments of stress or surprise. Would you like to see our statistical analysis of the phrase holy? Maya lunged for the podium, but slipped on the newly waxed floor. She crashed into a Zalaxian delegate, whose crystalline form began resonating with what sounded suspiciously like laughter. The Vex were frantically documenting everything. In the back of the room, someone whispered, "This is definitely going viral." Ambassador Chen maintained her diplomatic composure, though Maya could see her mother's slight smile. Perhaps, the ambassador suggested, we should move on to the section about human dietary habits. Oh yes, Quirks agreed cheerfully. We have some fascinating observations about the human practice of consuming food items shaped like their reproductive organs. For instance, these cylindrical meat products called hot dogs. Maya decided that perhaps a career change was in order, something simple, like deep space mining or volcano photography. Universal understanding. The aftermath of Quirks's presentation spread across the galaxy faster than FTL communications. Maya sat in her office on Europa Station, watching as yet another news outlet picked up the story. The headlines were getting increasingly creative. DORSIAN, scientist, excuriosies, humanities DGG ist sewarit. Alien researcher, mistakes, human anatomy, for mining equipment, interstellar confidrencegeoes viral. UUW und VELIV what had HAPPNED next. I believe I may have caused some distress, Quirks said, their scales a muted gray of concern as they watched the feeds. though I don't understand why. The Zalaxians found our research fascinating. They've requested 3 follow-up studies. Maya was about to respond when her computer chimed. Another message from Earth's Sinological Research Board. She opened it with trepidation, expecting another reprimand. Instead, she found something surprising. "Cracks," she said slowly, "you're not going to believe this, but your presentation has actually done something remarkable." The Dorsian scales shifted to a questioning purple. "Please elaborate." "Look at these statistics. Since your presentation, applications for xenobiology studies have increased by 300%. Multiple species have reached out for cultural exchange programs. Even the Vex, who normally avoid direct contact with other species, have requested permission to establish a permanent research station on Earth. This is positive." Carax's translator harmonized with uncertainty. "Incredibly so. Your unique approach to human biology has somehow broken down barriers that diplomatic missions have been struggling with for years." Maya laughed, the absurdity of the situation finally hitting her. "You've made humanity relatable. Every species has their biological quirks and cultural taboos. By exposing ours so thoroughly, you've helped other species see us as less alien." Carax's scales brightened. "Then perhaps we should proceed with our follow-up study on human mating rituals. I have extensive data on something called pickup lines that seems particularly inefficient yet culturally significant." "Let's hold off on that for now," Maya said quickly. "But I do have an idea. Your presentation showed me that we've been too reserved in our scientific exchanges. Maybe it's time we embraced a more open approach, within reason." Over the next few weeks, Maya and Carax developed a new framework for xenobiological research. They created guidelines for respectful cultural exchange that acknowledged both scientific curiosity and cultural sensitivity. Their paper, "Breaking the Ice: Using Biological Misunderstandings as a Bridge Between Species," became required reading at sinological institutes across known space. The Zalaxians were particularly enthusiastic about the new approach. Their chief researcher, a crystalline entity named Spark of Dawn, collaborated with Maya and Carax on a comparative study of reproductive methods across sentient species. Their findings led to breakthroughs in xenobiological medicine that benefited all participating species. Even the Vex contributed, sharing their own embarrassing biological features, like their tendency to perform elaborate courtship dances when exposed to certain frequencies of light. This led to an informal gathering where representatives from each species shared their most awkward biological functions, creating bonds of understanding through shared vulnerability. During one such session, a Vex researcher accidentally activated their mating display, leading to a chain reaction of crystalline resonance among the Zalaxians, which in turn caused Carax's scales to strobe in sympathetic patterns. The human delegates couldn't help but laugh, and soon the room was filled with the various sounds of alien amusement. "You see," Carax said to Maya as they watched the impromptu interspecies party unfold, "biology is the great equalizer. We all have our peculiarities, our evolutionary oddities, our vestigial features, whether they're actually vestigial or just appear so to foreign eyes." Maya nodded, watching as a Zalaxian attempted to teach a Vex how to refract light in specific patterns. "Though maybe we can agree to stop using Earth's entertainment media as primary research sources, I'm still getting questions about why humans don't actually burst into song during emotional moments." "Agreed." Carax's scales shimmered with amusement. "Though I must admit, I'm still puzzled by one thing. Given the obvious inefficiency of human courtship rituals, why hasn't your species developed a more direct approach? The Dorsian method of compatible genetic sequence display seems much more practical." "Sometimes inefficiency has its own charm," Maya replied. "Besides, if we were all perfectly logical about reproduction, I wouldn't have such entertaining research material." Carax's scales rippled with what Maya had learned to recognize as their version of laughter. "Speaking of research, the Zalaxians have proposed a joint study on human dancing rituals. They find the concept of voluntary rhythmic movement quite fascinating." Maya groaned. Please tell me you haven't shown them footage from Earth nightclubs. Not yet, but I did come across something called TikTok dances that seems culturally significant. Maya decided that some cultural exchanges might need to wait for future generations, preferably many generations in the future. The last laugh. 1 year after the infamous presentation, Maya stood at a podium in the newly constructed Interstellar Cultural Exchange Center in New Delhi. The building itself was a testament to the unexpected outcomes of Quirks's research. Its architecture incorporated design elements from all 17 known spacefaring species, including a section that looked suspiciously like a giant anatomical reference. Distinguished delegates, Maya began, trying not to smile at the memory. 1 year ago, we experienced what many thought would be a devastating diplomatic incident. Instead, it became the foundation for the most successful sinological exchange program in human history. The audience, representing species from across known space, showed various signs of agreement. The Zalaxians chimed melodiously, their crystalline forms refracting the morning light. The Vex clicked their mandibles appreciatively. And Quirks, now serving as the head of the Dorjan Cultural Integration Committee, displayed scales of proud iridescent blue. Today, we celebrate not just our differences, but our shared capacity for growth through misunderstanding. Who would have thought that an innocent question about human anatomy would lead to breakthrough developments in interspecies medicine, cultural exchange programs on 12 planets, and yes, the galaxy's most comprehensive database of biological euphemisms? A ripple of multi-species laughter moved through the crowd. Even the usually stoic Vex bobbed in their version of amusement. But perhaps the most significant outcome, Maya continued, has been the development of the Universal Cultural Context Protocol, a framework that helps us navigate our differences with humor and grace rather than embarrassment or offense. She gestured to a holographic display showing various scientific achievements of the past year, new medical treatments based on cross-species research, technological advances inspired by biological studies, and cultural exchange programs that had led to unprecedented cooperation between species. And yes, Maya added with a slight smirk, we did have to include a section specifically about not using social media as a primary research source. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. Quirks slithered forward to join her at the podium, their scales now a sophisticated pattern of academic regalia. If I may add, they said, their translator perfectly conveying their tone of scholarly amusement, we have also learned that humans are remarkably resilient when it comes to embarrassment. In fact, they often transform it into something called memes, which appear to serve as a form of cultural bonding. Maya nodded. The infamous space snake memes have actually become a symbol of human Dorjan friendship, though I still maintain that comparing certain human anatomical features to various Earth creatures should not have become an interstellar trend. The Zalaxian ambassador chimed in, their crystalline form vibrating with mirth. We have found the human capacity for self-deprecating humor to be most enlightening. It has inspired us to share our own embarrassing biological functions, such as our tendency to accidentally refract light in mating patterns during important diplomatic meetings. Speaking of which, Quirks added, their scales shifting to a more serious tone, we have prepared a new research proposal. Given the success of our previous studies, we believe it's time to explore another fascinating aspect of human biology. Specifically, why humans insist on using their sound-producing orifices to create rhythmic vibrations during courtship rituals. Maya's eyes widened. Quirks, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Indeed, we wish to conduct a comprehensive study of human singing, with particular emphasis on something called karaoke. Our preliminary research suggests it plays a crucial role in human mating behaviors, especially after the consumption of fermented beverages. The assembled delegates buzzed with interest. The Vex representatives were already extending their data-gathering appendages. The Zalaxians began resonating at frequencies that suggested eager anticipation. Maya looked out at the expectant faces of humanity's galactic neighbors and couldn't help but laugh. "Well," she said, "at least this time we know what we're getting into. Though perhaps we should establish some guidelines about filming research subjects during karaoke sessions." "Too late," Cracks announced cheerfully. "The Vex already have an extensive database of human singing performances. They find the concept of deliberately producing off-key vocalizations particularly fascinating. They've even attempted to replicate the phenomenon. Though I must say, 6-part harmonic screeching in arachnid frequencies is an acquired taste." As the assembly dissolved into various species versions of laughter, Maya reflected on how far they'd come. What had started as an embarrassing misunderstanding had evolved into something beautiful, a genuine appreciation for the awkward, messy, sometimes hilarious reality of being sentient beings in a vast universe. "You know," she said to Carax as they watched a Zalaxian attempt to teach a Vex the choreography to YMCA, "maybe this is what first contact should really be about. Not just sharing our achievements and knowledge, but also our embarrassing moments, our weird biological quirks, our awkward cultural misunderstandings. It makes us all more real to each other." Carax's scales shifted to a warm, thoughtful gold. "Indeed, though I still maintain that your species' reproductive appendages bear a striking resemblance to—" "Don't say it," Maya interrupted quickly. "We've made amazing progress in interstellar relations, but some things are still better left unsaid. At least until after the karaoke research is complete." "Speaking of which," Crack said, their scales brightening mischievously, "I believe it's your turn to demonstrate this total eclipse of the heart ritual the humans seem so fond of performing." Maya looked at her friend, then at the expectant faces of their galactic colleagues, and decided that some forms of embarrassment were worth it for the sake of science. Besides, she thought as she stepped up to the karaoke machine, at least this time she knew exactly what she was getting into. Though she did make a mental note to disable Carax's recording devices first. Some things didn't need to be preserved for posterity, or future xenobiological research papers.